So after 10 years in restaurants and working with every kind of people, getting tipped and getting not tipped by them, and seeing how the internet has a fever talking about tipping, let's delve into the subject together and see if we can come up with a conclusion. Because should you tip or should you not tip? That is the question. Me, myself, from the beginning of my serving career, I started wondering about tips and how could I increase them. So to do that, I had to understand how tip was created. So let's learn that together, because actually tipping wasn't invented in America. It was invented in Europe. Yes, shocks, waves of shocks to everybody, because Europeans, they don't really tip. So basically 400 years ago in Europe, tipping started being something that it wasn't about being fair, it wasn't about being, a system, but about showing wealth to the other people, and actually asking for promptness, be ready for me. So who would tip first was the rich people, as a way of, I'm important, please take care of me first. When Americans traveled to Europe back in the day, they brought that idea back. And at first, it was not seen as something pleasant to do. It was considered very un-American to tip, like it was classism or being part of a system, which they did not appreciate it. But here's what happens. After the Civil War, restaurants and railroads, they realized that they could hire, which is very interesting, this story. They could hire a lot of nearly freed slaves to work for minimum wage or not paying them at all sometimes, and just rely on people coming in the establishment and tipping them. That would be the living wage they would make. So in America, tipping didn't grow out of generosity, it grew out of a broken system. Instead of employees paying the workers, customers were asked to do it. So as most of the other countries went in the opposite direction, having normal wages and tipping was like a bonus, America went in their own direction, which was, please, let's pay the minimum we can to the servers, and people rely on tip, which is basically the system that is still present today. Now, let's take a look at the present day in each culture, right? Because everybody has their own thing going. Everybody behaves different when it comes to this subject. And for most Americans, right, they will tip. Usually, they will tip at least 20% or more when it comes to good service. If you provide them with everything on time, if you give them the refills, if you made the right notifications and everything went great, you're gonna get the money, Very rare to Americans to not tip. It happens too, there's a lot of Americans that don't tip, but the majority, let's say 95%, they will tip. You understand that servers behave when you have a top, a 20 top of white people coming in that they look well dressed. Every server was like, I want that table because it's gonna be good money. That's the motivation behind everything in a restaurant. Then we have the Europeans, the guys who crazily originated tipping, but they either tip not at all or they tip very good. There's no between with Europeans because they don't really believe. If you happen to deal with Europeans on your restaurant, you serve them, you have that experience where, for example, one time, I will never forget this, I work in a restaurant that was a very nice restaurant in Orlando. And I served, a bunch of Europeans, and I remember who paid the bill was a French woman. And this was like $150 bill. So the tip would be at least decent, right? And she didn't tip me at all. And I went to her asking hey, what happened? Did you not get a good service? Did anything went missing on your table? Because usually the costume is to tip the server 20%, and it didn't leave me. So you gotta ask this question rightfully, because if you frame it as if they're fucking assholes, you might get fired. So you actually you wanna ask them, please, how can I improve? But that'll be, the Trojan horse to let them know that they fuck you, So she actually did a very French response, was like, oh, I'm European, I am selfish. I was like, got it. Then we have Latinos. Dios mío, cabrón. La propina way. Mira, Latinos. Here's what happens. They hard workers, right? They work in construction, they work, as landscape guys, or they're very rich. The main thing with Latinos is make them feel seen. If you happen to interact, if they have a baby, you interact with the baby. If they have, if they're on a date or something, you happen to make them feel seen and, make them feel like they belong in that restaurant. Usually, 90% of the time, they will give you the money, and it can be a crazy amount of money. I've been tipped by Latinos in a great fashion, and I highly recommend if you get like a 12 top of Mexicans, show them love, and they will reciprocate the love. Now, black people. Now, this is interesting because you can get mad at black people for not tipping at all, but also you can get mad or not get mad for getting those crazy, outrageous tips from, I have a story in my book that I got tipped, $800 by a guy that looked like Ja Rule, and then I have my joke about the $1,400 tip, which is both real stories. I worked in a nightclub called Senior Frogs back in the day, and that was by far the biggest tips I ever made in my life, both by black people. So it kind of balances out when you don't get tipped by them, because I've been plenty of times serving black people there, don't tip, zero, like a $300 check, zero. One of the videos that I talk here is do black people tip, because I'm mentioning that the biggest tip I ever made was from a black table, and the lowest tip I ever made was from a black table. So it's kind of both sides of the same spectrum, And I'll say this, black people, they kind of don't trust systems. That's their main thing, right? You feel that when they're walking a restaurant, like they have an attitude like as if you're trying to fuck them over. They'll show you, they'll let you know, and that's when you gotta put your game up. When you're becoming a good server and you notice that, you're like, all right, you gotta work with these people. Things you can say to black people to make them, feel seen is like, I'll make that happen for you. Like they want modifications, right? They want I don't know. I was working in a Mexican restaurant and I have a table of black people. Those are like 6 of them. And the main question was, how the hell y'all don't have wings? And me in my mind, like, bro, it's a Mexican restaurant, motherfucker. We don't serve wings in here. What are you talking about? But I was like, you know what, dude, actually, Mexican wings would be the shit, I might recommend that to my manager. But unfortunately, we don't have it. That sounds like the idea. I'm going to recommend that to my manager. Imagining those spices, like, hell yeah, man, now we talking. Then, everything flow after. Of course, 6 people, we can add the gratuity on it. Boom, magic, But I think they still left me like $20 extra, Remember I'm not gonna say it because it's great, but the name of the guy was Clifford. He gave me his credit card. I was like, oh shit. I just had, I watched Dave Chappelle at night before and he mentions like the Clifford thing, You gotta understand, I'm an immigrant and these things, I don't really know these things. And when I see them, it surprises me. So basically, tipping comes down to this, systems. Everybody has different systems. If you're because the things with Europeans, right? And they coming over, Europeans are the only race who travels thousands of miles just to be disappointed consistently. Is surprisingly, wild, because you have them in the restaurant, you talk with them, they're having a good time, but when it comes to check, and they act like they don't know, right? So it's very interesting for them to be the creators of tipping and to be the most against, because Europeans, they will give you a piece of their minds when it comes to tipping, oh, actually your boss should provide that. Why do you do this job? The main thing you got to understand with service industry, restaurants and bartenders, they're not some of them stay doing their job forever, but it's mainly a passage thing. You're doing something, you're in college or you have a personal project. And working in restaurants is very good money. You make decent living in restaurants, that's the main reason why we do it. And if you break that, unspoken rule, you're gonna get looked down upon, because everybody will know that you didn't tip. And you're gonna get what? You're gonna get the order taker. Okay. Oh, you want no tomato? You're not gonna get any empathy. You're not gonna get sympathy from the servers. You're not gonna. If you need something with like urgency or something, not gonna happen. That's the way it is. Tips are optional. So is rushing. Okay. In other occasions, should you tip? Because now it's an epidemic. You're talking to someone like, I don't know, I went to a dentist and there's like a tip charge for the the receptionist or something. And in my mind, I was like, that's crazy. Like, what is she doing? Because servers, the thing with servers, like we made $7 to $8, like $9 an hour. So that's not real money. So you got to make the tips, otherwise you will be in a position where you're not going to be able to pay rent. But a receptionist and things like that, they're receiving like, I don't know, $16 to $18 an hour, right? So why should you tip in that situation? I don't think that's the situation you should tip, If you go into a Vans or something, the guy is just, I don't know how to explain this, but I feel like tipping is like when it's something, for example, you go into a restaurant, you have a table of 12 people. Everybody's different. Everybody's ordering their own thing. Some people are allergic. Some people have, issues with drinks and they want modifications. And that takes time from the server. So if he's serving you in that table, he's not going to serve anybody else, right? So he has to spend the time he has with you, which implies that the money he's going to make that night is from your table. So if he gives you good service and he puts in the effort to make you feel seen and like, actually, you know what, dude? I went to that restaurant. It was a great night. You got to tip that guy. You got to make him feel recognized, because it's the worst feeling when you trust someone, when you're having like a back and forward in a positivity with the table and they don't tip you, bro. It feels like it's one of the worst feelings, like betrayal. I don't even know how to explain it to you. But that's it. What do you think? Let me know in the comments and subscribe to the channel. We're going to delve more into these subjects, We're talking everything here, guys. We're talking about restaurant, about life experience, about drugs, about books, about comedy. Subscribe, and that was it.